But again, I'm very excited to share with you. Now, I'm going to draw us back. I'm going to rewind the clock a little bit to my senior year of high school. I know, I'm taking it back to when the dinosaurs roamed the earth. Here we go. So, when I was a senior in high school, my plan was to be on Broadway. Some of you guys know this. Some of you guys have heard this. I wanted to be a Broadway musical theater performer. That was my hope and my ambition. And so in order to execute that plan, there were a couple of steps that needed to fall into place. One big one was to go to a school that had a good musical theater program. And the best musical theater program in the state was the one at Florida State University. And so I wanted to get into their Bachelor of Fine Arts program. I'd already been accepted into the university as a whole. Now I just needed to get into this specific program. So what you do to get in is you prepare an audition. So you get a monologue and you have 2 songs. And so I prepared my monologue. I prepared 2 songs. One of them was from Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is interesting because today we're talking about Joseph. But the other one, the interesting one for this story, was from West Side Story. It was Something's Coming. And it's like, could be, who knows? It's a song about like hope. There's something due any day, I will know right away, soon as it shows. It's very like, hey, musical theater. I was in the heart of that. So I prepared the song. I loved the song. It was all about a bright future and what was coming around the corner. And boy, it was exactly what I needed for this audition. So I'd practiced it. I'd sung it. I'd gotten really familiar with it. I'd done it with a record so many times. I knew what I was doing. I had my head about me. And I stepped into that audition room in front of the panel of judges who would decide whether or not I was admitted to the program. I introduced myself. I say, hello, I'm Kasey Sanchez, and I'll be performing Something's Coming. 1, 2, 3, 4. No, not quite that much pizzazz. But I did say, hello, introduce myself. And then what you do is you bring sheet music for your songs that you're going to sing, and you take them over to the accompanist. So that's a trained piano player who is going to sight read your song, unless they happen to have run across it before. So these people are really skilled. They'll see the sheet music for the first time, and they'll just sit down and start playing it along with you. So you just give them a tempo, and they dive right in. They're very, very capable pianists. And so that's how a lot of those auditions work, and that's how this one did. I hand them the sheet music. I give them my tempo, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that's great. I get to the center. I give them a nod. And they start playing. And I'm listening to them playing this intro, and I'm like, what is this? What song is this? This isn't right. And so I'm like sitting there waiting, like trying to come in, wait for the music to sound familiar. Could it? And so I stop. Can we restart? They let me restart. I go again. What? That's when I realized something. As much as I'd practiced this song, as ready as I felt, I had never run it with an accompanist. I never actually sat down with the pianist and sang while they played the song. And in that moment, I just felt all of my hopes and dreams start to wash away. And I did something that you're never supposed to do. My flesh got the better of me, and I glared at that accompanist so hard. I was like, I was so frustrated because in my mind, they were messing up. I hadn't even put it together yet that I could have just started singing and they would have found the right spot because they're really skilled at what they do. I was so frustrated and so flustered in that moment that I just couldn't even start singing. And I was blaming them because they weren't playing it the way that I was expecting them to. They weren't doing it just like it was in the movie. They were doing the Broadway version, and, that's on them. They should have known what I was going to do. No, I was really discouraged. I was really frustrated. And here's the thing. They were there. As much as I felt alone in that moment, as much as I felt like I was just left out to dry, hung out to dry, as much as I felt like I was just totally isolated, they were with me. And if I had just plowed through and started singing, they would have jumped to where I was because that's how skilled these people are. But I was ignorant to that. I was too immature, and I let my flesh get the better of me. And needless to say, I didn't get into the program that year, which is okay. God had a different plan for me, but that didn't go well. Now, here's the thing. Here's why I tell you all this. that feeling of being in the middle of the trial, of being all alone, sometimes really is this illusion. That person, that accompanist, they were right on. They knew what they were doing. It was me that was missing the mark. It was me that felt and believed that I was alone. Now, as often as we might feel like we are alone in the middle of our trial, I want to tell you, church, God is still with us. Even if we're out of sync, even if we are getting flustered because he's not performing our plan the way that we hoped, the way that we imagined, God is still with us, and he's working something out. Now, perhaps you've asked the question in the face of trials, where is God then? Where is God in the middle of this? There's a tendency to think that the existence of hurt and of pain or injustice in this world means that God is forgetful. But he's not. Scripture makes it clear that God is mindful of you. And if you have committed yourself to him, committed your life and your way to him, you're in his hands. Many fall into the false idea that when things are going well, God is with them, but in difficult times, he isn't. But that simply isn't true. The Lord is consistent, church. He's faithful even when we're faithless. He's there even when we are off base. And he walks with us even when things look perilous. So for the next few weeks, we are going to look at the life of Joseph, who saw trial after trial and still trusted in and received the blessing and favor of the Lord. So before we get into Genesis chapter 39, a little bit of backstory. Joseph was the son of Israel, the son of Jacob, right? So he was this very precious child in his family. You see, he was born late in his father's life, and he was born from the mother that his father loved most. So he had a couple of different wives. He was born of Rachel. And so Joseph was Israel's favorite. He loved him so much, and he had blessings for him, and he had a future and a hope in store for him. He had big plans for his son Joseph. He even made him this beautiful, multicolored cloak. In the musical, it's a Technicolor dream coat. But in the Bible, it's not quite that campy. So he makes him this beautiful, beautiful coat. And it's this signifying garment that says, this son is special. This son has a bright future. And the cool thing about Joseph is not only did he have that blessing, but he also was a righteous young man. He would even get in trouble with his brothers because he wanted them to do things the right way. And sometimes he would kind of rat on them if they weren't taking care of their father's property the way they ought to. He wanted to do right by his father. He wanted to do right by the Lord. And matters got worse when he started having these dreams that would predict his family bowing to him, that he would be the greatest among them. Oh, when his brothers heard that, they were not happy. And so they plotted to take him out. They saw him coming towards the field one day when he was seeking them out, and as he approached, they made a plan to kill him. Now, as they talked about it, it got dialed back to just throwing him in a pit. And he ends up being captured, having his garment torn away from him, and thrown into a pit. Then he's sold into slavery by his own brothers because they hated who he was and were jealous of what God was doing in him. And that's where we pick up. Genesis 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an Egyptian officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the bodyguard, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. The Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. And he was in the house of his master, the Egyptian. Now his master saw that the Lord was with him and how the Lord caused all that he did to prosper in his hand. So Joseph found favor in his sight and became his personal servant, and he made him overseer of his house. And all that he owned, he put in his charge. It came about From the time he made him overseer in his house and over all that he owned, the Lord blessed the Egyptian's house on account of Joseph. Thus the Lord's blessing was upon all that he owned, in the house and in the field. So he left everything he owned in Joseph's charge. And with him, there he did not concern himself with anything except the food which he ate. Now Joseph was handsome in form and appearance. It came about after these events that his master's wife looked with desire at Joseph, and she said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There's no one greater in the house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife." And I love what he says next. "How then could I do this great evil and sin against God?" As she spoke to Joseph day after day, he did not listen to her to lie beside her or be with her. Now it happened one day that he went into the house to do his work, and none of the men of the household were inside. She caught him by his garment, saying, "Lie with me." And he left his garment in her hand and fled and went outside. When she saw that he had left his garment in her hand and had fled outside, she called to the men of her household and said to them, "See, he has brought in a Hebrew to us to make sport of us. He came into me to lie with me, and I screamed. When he heard that I raised my voice and screamed, he left his garment beside me and fled and went outside." So she left his garment beside her until his master came home. Then she spoke to him with these words, "The Hebrew slave whom you brought to us came in to me to make sport of me, and I raised my voice and screamed. He left his garment beside me and fled outside." Now, when his master heard the words of his wife, which she spoke to him, saying, "This is what your slave did to me," his anger burned. So Joseph's master took him and put him in the jail, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. And he was there in jail. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer. The chief jailer committed to Joseph's charge all the prisoners who were in the jail, so that whatever was done there, he was responsible for it. The chief jailer did not supervise anything under Joseph's charge, because the Lord was with him, and whatever he did, the Lord made him to prosper. Joseph put God first. Joseph went through trial after trial, and I can't imagine how exhausting that could have been. But he put God first in each situation, knowing that his hope was found in the Lord, knowing where he needed to look. If you've come to a place today where you feel stuck, nowhere to go, if you felt like no matter how much good you have done or pursued, things don't seem to be working out as you had hoped, I want to encourage you this morning. I want to encourage you to put God first, yes, because when you do, when you lean into your faith in him, when you lean into the loving arms of our Father, you can be sure that he is with you, that he brings success amidst the mess. After Joseph was betrayed by his own brothers, he finds himself sold into slavery in Egypt. Now, in his father's house, he had freedom, he had favor, he had abundant blessing and a bright future. But all of this seemed to be stripped away from him, just as his colorful coat had been stripped away. Can you imagine the pain of that? The disappointment. Man, disappointment is a mean visitor. Having your dreams and your future ripped from you, being betrayed by those who should have had your back, that's a hurtful circumstance. There are times when we might find ourselves in the middle of a horrible mess. I think we found at least a few this year. And that might be by our own misstep. Other times we're thrown into trouble by no fault of our own. Or worse yet, by our own righteousness. We might be cast into difficulty. And that can be a really frustrating and demoralizing circumstance. That can be a really heavy place to sit. And that's exactly where Joseph finds himself. I mean, he was hated by his siblings for being too good, for being too loved by their father, for having too grand of a calling, and so they threw him into peril. Joseph was in the midst of what could have been a true tragedy. His hopes and future ripped away. However, in darkness, light persisted and it grew. We see that Joseph quickly found blessing and favor, that his hope was not destroyed. Why? It says here in verse 2, the Lord was with Joseph, so he became a successful man. Now, this is a continual theme throughout this passage and in Joseph's life. The Lord was with him, and this was the root of his favor. The Lord being with Joseph was the root of his blessing and his success. Darkness could not overcome the light that the Lord placed in Joseph's life. It could not. Even without his technicolor coat, Joseph's future was still so bright. The circumstance could not overcome the destiny. We find the same principle at play in our walk today, church. It's the same God. If you are on God's side, and I want to stress that, if you are on God's side, not getting him on our side, if we are stepping into his way for us, his calling, if you are his child, then God is with you, God is for you, and he will bring you blessings that are deeper than you could have imagined. He can do that. He will do that. Romans 8:31. What then shall we say to these things? If God is for us, who is against us? When God is making a movement, when God is working something out, when God is determined to give you favor and blessing, nothing can stand in the way of that. No matter what circumstance you find yourself in, God's plan is not foiled. In spite of whatever mess we find ourselves, nothing can stand against the will or the way that God has. Now, the Lord has a plan for us. He has a plan for you and I, for us as a body, just as he did for Joseph. And even though it can be hard to discern what good could possibly come out of grueling seasons or great disappointments or great losses, his plan is still moving forward. He's still with us. God doesn't always call us to understand that plan, but he does call us to believe him, to trust in him through every season. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 8 and 10, by faith Abraham was called, obeying by going out to a place which he was to receive for an inheritance. And he went out, not knowing where he was going, for he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. You see, there was purpose for what Joseph was going through. And while Joseph wasn't sure of what the exact outcome may be, he trusted that the architect and the builder of his future was God. He leaned into him. Now, I pray that we could have faith like that. Can that hope and trust be enough for us, church? Can that sustain us in the midst of the mess? That brilliant architect of the universe, our God, who ignited the stars in the great and dark sky and laid the foundations of the earth, that very God is also carefully considering and crafting your best story Can we lean into that hope? While it isn't easy to accept when things look bleak, let's remember that when light does start to break through the smoke of our circumstance, we aren't the only ones that notice. When God starts to shine through us, other people take notice. So we see that the Lord was with Joseph. We also see that Potiphar, his master, saw that the Lord was with him. He recognized it as well. It was even phrased, he saw that the Lord was with him. He recognized that that was the cause of the blessing. So he places Joseph in charge of his entire estate. I love this. Joseph was shining so brightly by the Lord and for the Lord that this Egyptian elite sees a glimmer of God. He sees that God is with his new servant. And this affords Joseph a position of honor and power in the middle of his mess. He doesn't get released, but even in the middle of his circumstance, God is blessing him. The Lord brought hope to Joseph's hopeless circumstance. God helped him excel in his duties, so much so it was evident, it was obvious that God was with him. I think to a circumstance that a friend of mine finds himself in. You see, he's been a minister vocationally for a long time. And as he moved to a part-time ministry position, he started to round out his income by doing musical gigs, by playing live events. He's a very talented musician. And so he would get a lot of opportunities to make money that way, doing something he loved, blessing people with music and the gifting God gave him. And then a global pandemic struck. And those opportunities dried up really fast. And all of a sudden, he saw his income really hurting. So he sought the Lord and tried to be dutiful and right by his family and pay the bills and do the things he needed to do. And ultimately, he applies at one of those big home improvement stores. He gets the job, gets a little bit above minimum wage, and says, okay, well, if this helps me get through this season, this is what I've got. Lord, let your will be done. So as he comes on board, they ask him, okay, so what department would you like to be in? And he says, oh, well, I did carpentry when I was in my 20s a little bit and, installing cabinets, stuff like that. So something in that field would work really well for me. And they say, okay, great, we're going to put you in plumbing. He hated plumbing. He said that out of all the departments they could have put him in, plumbing was the last on his list. And yet that's where they put him. So it's still a job, still an opportunity. And as he is working, sometimes coming off having a gig here and there in the morning, coming to work in the afternoon and thinking like, oh man, what is my life right now? He set his mind clearly on one thing. I am going to work as if I'm doing this unto the Lord. This might not be what I want to do. This might be a really rough circumstance that I'm taken away from something that I love and I'm good at. I have a blessing and a future in to something that honestly could easily feel beneath me. I'm just going to commit my way to the Lord. And so that's what he did. And over the course of 7 weeks, he did an excellent job just doing his tasks, picked things up quickly. He got to talk to people about Jesus, his coworkers. He stopped numerous shoplifting attempts. Actually, one time he got to tell one of the shoplifters about Jesus as they tried to get their truck started in the parking lot and get away with the stuff. He just stood there and told them about Jesus until they decided to give the stuff back. And over the course of 7 weeks, he just pushed and worked and did everything he could as if he was doing it for God. And at the end of that period, he gets called into the manager's office. Now, this guy's 51, so he's lived some life. He's done some stuff in his days. His manager says, hey, so what do you want to do when you grow up? Ha, what a great thing to be asked. And he says, oh, I want to be a firefighter. They laugh it off. They kind of have a chuckle there. And he says, well, I think you missed your chance on that. But do you plan to stay here? Do you see a future here at this place? He says, well, I really appreciate the job that I've got, but, just looking at the pay and the bills that I've got, I'm not sure if it's a long-term solution. He says, okay, great. That's all. I just wanted to hear that you're interested in staying on board. Say no more. We'll be getting back to you. Okay? So he moves on with his life, and a couple weeks later, he finds out that he's getting a promotion. Now, there are 8 tiers in that company of pay. And of authority. And the 5th and 6th tier are on basically the same level, he told me. So the only thing above that is 7 and 8, right? So he was on tier 1. They bumped him all the way up to tier 6, nearly doubling his pay, giving him a management position, more or less, giving him a much higher opportunity, giving him a really blessed little niche in that home improvement store. Now, as he told me the story, I was just agog. I was so amazed and in awe of what the Lord had done, this beautiful illustration. God had taken this man who was thrown into a circumstance that could have easily been so disappointing. And that man decided to do things right by the Lord. And in just trying to serve Jesus and serve people and do what he was called to do, he's shown. And I believe that whether people would recognize it or not, what they were seeing was God in him and provided him this amazing opportunity. I'm honestly so grateful he shared that story with me, and I wish he was here to tell it to you, because when he tells you, it's so enthralling to hear his heart and the ups and downs of it. But here's the thing. This is the same kind of hope that we can carry into our messes. Even when things look like they've taken a bad turn, God can still use us to glorify his name. God can still cause us to shine in the midst of the darkness. In fact, he wants to do that. So understand, church, that God is still with you. And bearing that in mind, I want to encourage you to choose righteousness. In the midst of it all, choose righteousness. Joseph, he'd been given great privilege and power in his master's household. And the whole of it was blessed on account of him. The whole household and beyond was blessed on account of him. Now, Joseph is shining so brightly that Potiphar's wife takes notice. She likes what she sees, and she starts a campaign of seduction. But I love Joseph's response. Behold, with me here, my master does not concern himself with anything in the house, and he has put all that he owns in my charge. There is no one greater in this house than I, and he has withheld nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. Now, I love this next part. How then could I do this great evil and sin against God? Now, he just listed all these things, all this trouble. He could dishonor his master, break the trust that was given to him, break the rules that were clearly set. He could get into real mortal peril there if he were to break those things. He set up a lot of problems, a lot of reasons why he should not enter into this thing with her. But Joseph refused her advances for one primary reason that he states. He didn't want to sin against God. That was his heart. More than getting in trouble, more than losing his position, more than sinning against her or her husband or anybody else in that house, he didn't want to sin against God. We need to have, I hope that we can have such a great dedication as that to the Lord. The image of someone so focused on pleasing God, so much more focused on pleasing God than pleasing anybody else, so interested in honoring the Lord that everything else is just an afterthought, every other blessing is just a byproduct. That idea is so fascinating to me. We see in Psalm 51, verse 4, David wrote, "Against you, you only, you being God, I have sinned and done what is evil in your sight, so that you are justified when you speak and blameless when you judge." Now, David's heart here is saying, Lord, I've sinned against you, you only. You're the one I'm worried about. I've done evil in your sight. Now, here's what's interesting. At the beginning of that passage, it clues us in that he wrote this after he was being confronted about the fact that he had just had adultery with Bathsheba. He had just done wrong to his wife. He had just done wrong to Bathsheba and her husband. He had done wrong as a spiritual and monarchical leader of their nation. He had sinned, you could say, against many, many people. But he says right here, in the wake of all that, against you, God, you only I have sinned and done evil in your sight. That depth of concern with being righteous before the Lord. And this is a man that the Bible says was after God's own heart, David was. That depth of concern with just being right with the Lord. He's the one whose opinion matters. I think there's something so powerful in that. I think it's worth underlining that was Joseph's heart, to be righteous before and for God. Joseph was set on walking righteously, on walking with the Lord. He must have known the source of his prosperity, known the inherent value of being right before the Lord, right? In Psalm 34, verse 25, it says, the eyes of the Lord are on the righteous, and his ears are attentive to their cry. Now, this verse here gives us a glimpse into something so powerful. God sees us. When we're walking right with him, not only does he see us, his eyes are on us, his ears are attentive to our cry. We choose righteousness in our lives when we pursue the character of Christ. For us, church, righteousness is this pursuit of the character of Christ, and we choose a right relationship with God in the same. And what's amazing is that right relationship with God is based on faith. In Romans 4:3, it says, Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Joseph needed that faith. He needed that righteous heart because this was not a one-time temptation. This is not a one-off issue. You see, day after day, Potiphar's wife would try and convince Joseph to be with her. Now, I have been trying to eat more healthily lately because, I've got a daughter at home. I want to live and be healthy for a long time, God willing. As long as I'm here, I want to be doing all right. So I've been trying to eat better, cut back on sugar. And one of the main places where I take in sugar is each morning I would have cereal for breakfast. And I'm not just talking like bran flakes, I'm talking like one of my favorite cereals was Fruit Loops with marshmallows. Sugar, right? Enough sugar in one serving for the whole week. And so I've been trying to cut back. But in our pantry, we still had a giant family-sized box of Lucky Charms. And every morning, I would wake up and try and prepare my breakfast. Maybe I'll have a banana with some peanut butter. That's healthy. Or a bagel. That's fine. Or, I'll have an apple and some toast. And every time I would look in the fridge, put my meal together, look in the pantry, and I would see a Lucky Charms box. The first couple of days, it was like, no, of course I'm not going to have that. I'm trying to eat better. But after a while, I'd get up in the morning, don't have a lot of time. Sure, it would be easy to pour myself a bowl of cereal right now. Be a lot easier than making toast. No, it's not what I need right now. But man, Lucky the Leprechaun was just staring at me with those inviting eyes. Hearts, stars, and horseshoes. Clovers and blue moons. Pots of gold and rainbows and the red balloons. Okay, you win, Lucky. I'm going to have some Lucky Charms this morning. And I did. I have to confess to you, church. I failed. I ate those Lucky Charms, and they were delicious. Isn't that the way temptation gets us? If all temptations were just these one-off challenges, we might have a much better track record than we do. Instead, these things come in waves, or sometimes relentless streams, not satisfied with your first no or your 70th. Now, in that temptation, we still have a calling to be righteous. And in order to do that, we need to lean into the faith-filled hope that what God offers is a blessing. God's blessing in righteousness is greater than any offering of sin. We need to hold on to the faith of that. We need to let that faith transmute into righteousness in us. We need to trust God more than our immediate desires. We need to value him more than what the flesh offers. That faith will be like righteousness to us if we can really trust our Lord, if we can really trust that being near to him is better. Joseph understood, despite what was happening, God was still with him. And rather than giving up, Joseph held on. Now, I think he knew the value of the Lord's attentive presence. Because Joseph, he'd been through some serious hardships. I mean, come on. We just looked at half of them. He'd been through some serious stuff. Couldn't it have been so easy for him to say, haven't I earned this? Just this, come on, it's one compromise. Haven't I been through enough? She's offering herself. No one will know. But rather than giving up or giving in or letting go of the Lord, Joseph maintained uncommon character. He responded to temptation and affliction with a continued pursuit of righteousness. And it's a good thing he did. It's a good thing he held to that faith. It's a good thing he valued the Lord's attentive presence. Because things weren't about to get any easier. But when things do get difficult, when things press into a deeper level of trouble, I want to remind you, church, that he has not forgotten you. God has not forgotten you. When Potiphar's wife brings false accusation, Joseph is again stripped of his garment and his position in life, and even thrown into greater trouble. Now, I think it's so interesting that each of these times that he's going from this position where he's worked his way into favor of God, I should say, has moved him into a place of favor. As a symbol of being stripped of that position, he's stripped of his clothes. His dream coat taken. His garment that he wore as the main servant in the house taken. And with those things, so too went what seemed to be a bright future. At this point, Joseph had gone from favored son in his father's household to favored servant in his master's household, and now to prisoner for a crime that he didn't commit. Sometimes it feels like our life is one mess after another. And every time we get on our feet, something comes to knock us down again. It'd be so easy in those low moments to entertain the question, has God just forgotten me? Has he just forgotten that I'm even here? Forgotten the promises that he gave to me? In circumstances like Joseph's, this becomes even more deeply true. Because not only was he doing everything he could to be right before the Lord, even in the midst of betrayal and disappointment, but it seemed like his righteousness was the very thing getting him into trouble. If he had ignored his calling in his father's house, would his brothers have let him be? If he had just given in to what the woman wanted, would she have turned against him? It's so painful when the reward for good seems to be evil. And boy, that's something the world is really good at, returning good for evil. And yet, the question might stand, where is the Lord in all of this? Yeah, okay, we know the world is like that, but God, why aren't you stepping in? Why am I going through this? Shouldn't he be protecting Joseph? Shouldn't he be protecting us? Has he forgotten us in our trial? Church, no. No, he hasn't. He remembers you. Psalm 34, verse 18 through 20. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and save those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. I'm going to read it again. The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. God is still there. He's still with you. When you're crushed, when the afflictions are plentiful, when you are brokenhearted, in those times when it can feel like you're the most alone, God is still with you. And he was still with Joseph in the depths of his mess. He was still with him in that prison. So much so that it wouldn't be too long before Joseph was running the whole jail. What? Who gets thrown into prison and then gets put in charge of the prison? Well, with God involved, it can happen. I believe all things are possible with God. God was extending kindness and favor to Joseph, even then, even in the middle of what he was going through. There's a poem that I'm going to share, and it's a very famous poem, so you may have heard it before. I remember the first time I ran across it was like in the bathroom of some friend's house I was visiting or something. It's like one of those, right? You'd see it on the wall or in like a flip book or something, but it's really widespread for a reason. One night I dreamed a dream. As I was walking along the beach with my Lord, across the dark sky flashed scenes from my life. For each scene, I noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and one to my Lord. After the last scene of my life flashed before me, I looked back at the footprints in the sand. I noticed that at many times along the path of my life, especially at the very lowest and saddest times, there was only one set of footprints. This really troubled me. So I asked the Lord about it. Lord, you said once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I noticed that during the saddest and most troublesome times of my life, there was only one set of footprints. I don't understand why. When I needed you the most, why would you leave me? You whispered, my precious child, I love you, and I will never leave you. Never, ever, during your trials and testings. When you saw only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. God is with you. If you're walking with him, if you're taking that stroll of life with God, he is with you. There's not a moment when he departs. He doesn't see the waves getting rough and peace out. He picks you up. He shoulders the weight. He carries you. He can be with us in the darkest parts of our trial. He is often, in fact, the one carrying the whole team. Sometimes God keeps us from harm and hurt that we're unaware of, and other times he works in the midst of the harm and the hurt that we are painfully aware of. And even when issues come in waves, and even when we feel like we can barely get our footing, we can trust that the Lord is near to us. He's near to the brokenhearted. He still has a plan to prosper, even then. So we see in future parts of Joseph's story that God would bring a lot of great blessing through the challenges that Joseph endured. Blessings that he could have completely missed had he stayed in his father's or Potiphar's household. A destiny that he brought Joseph through to. And so we see that hope. We see that distant hope. We see great things that God does. But the amazing thing is that even in the middle of Joseph's darkest season, even in the middle of being betrayed, beaten, thrown into a pit, whatever was coming against him, God was there. And the Bible describes him in the midst of those seasons as prosperous. In Genesis 39 alone, the scripture indicates that the Lord's favor and blessing upon Joseph was there. It indicates it 8 times in 23 verses, filled with temptation, false accusation, being put in prison. 8 times, we're told that Joseph had God with him and that it was a blessing. Yes, God brings prosperity to his children. But this tells me that we need to redraft our working definition of prosperity. Because even when our circumstances seem bleak, or any onlooker would deem our lives failed or hopeless or tragic, we can draw near to God and trust that he's working something brilliant out. That's where we can lean into verses like 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verse 16 tells us, rejoice always. How can you rejoice always when there's so much terrible stuff going on, when difficult things are coming up in our life? Sure, I get rejoicing when I'm happy, but when things are good, when the sun is shining and life is easy. But how do I rejoice when things are ugly? Because God will still bless you. Because that's what the prosperity of the Lord looks like. It is not always a complete circumnavigation of the trial. Many times we go through it, but even in the midst of it, even in slavery, even in prison, even in hurt, even in failure, even in the lowest, darkest places of our life, God can bless you there. God wants to bless you there. God has a purpose to cause you to shine. John chapter 16, verse 33, these things I've spoken to you, Jesus says, so that in me you may have peace. In the world you have tribulation, but take courage. I have overcome the world. There's going to be trouble in this life. There's going to be trouble for us. But we can have peace. We can be courageous because our Savior has won, and his plan for us still holds true. So as I invite the worship team up, I bring this hope, this exercise, maybe a challenge to us. I don't know what lies ahead. I don't know what challenge you're facing right now. Maybe the sky is blue for you, but something will come up at some point. But whatever you're facing down, whatever you're in the middle of or walking towards, I want us to just take a moment right now and dedicate our way to the Lord. Commit ourselves to walking near him, to drawing near to the Lord so that he would draw near to us. Staying in righteousness, and not only that, have faith that he is blessing us, that he will bless us. It can be so easy when you're in the thick of it to look at everything that's wrong. And believe me, it would have been easy for Joseph to sit there in prison and think, what happened to everything that was promised to me? I'm in jail. My life couldn't get any worse. This is horrible. It would have been easy for him to look at his circumstances, being sold into slavery, and say, my brothers betrayed me. They took my gift. Everything about my life is being robbed from me. He could have easily become totally embittered, fallen into great despair. But that's not what he did. He trusted that the Lord was with him. Church, as you look forward to whatever challenge may be in front of you, I want to encourage you to look for the ways in which God's blessing you. Even if you look back across the way this year has gone so far, there are plenty of challenges for you to run through. Look for the ways that the Lord is blessing, has blessed. It's easy to focus on all the bad stuff that goes on. But it is amazing to recognize that God still works through the midst of it. Don't be so blinded by the smoke and the hurt that you miss the beautiful light that God is tracing through your life. It's still there. God is still with you.